Good morning, everyone, and happy Tuesday. Today I'm going to talk about horse domestication because I did dogs and I don't think I've done cats yet, but I'm trying to get to all the species because a lot of people know about dog domestication and cat, but horse is actually really interesting because it's disputed how and when they got domesticated because there's so much conflicting information, and we're going to talk about it. So the theories behind when, one of them is approximately 2000 BCE, and that's because they found chariot burial sites and noticed that the horses were buried with the chariots, the bones of the horses. The follow-up theory was approximately 3500 BC because there's a place called the Eurasian Steppes, and it's in the Akmola province of Kazakhstan where they first found the proof that horses lived in small towns because they found the bodies of, hi Vanessa, they found the bodies of horses buried in the areas around the town. We know that in approximately 30,000 BC, horses were hunted for meat. This is in the Paleolithic era. It's a lot of big words this week. So that's initially when they started getting hunted, but when they noticed that the horses were in areas that weren't normally populated by wild horses, they started to consider that perhaps this is when they were domesticated. But they know that they were used for things like transport, pulling carts, agricultural, of course, pulling the till that ripped up the ground, and warfare, of course, for soldiers. But it ultimately comes down to what you consider domestication, and there was great debate about this because some of the archaeologists and scientists argued that domestication is defined by when humans had control over breeding. And this means they could influence the size of the horse and the variability of their features. So they would breed them for example, muscle development. They would build stronger horses. They would build faster horses, depending on what they were using them for. The other argument for domestication, or I guess opposing argument, is that domestication means that there's skeletal evidence of them working. So for example, if they noticed that the teeth were worn down from the bit, or that the shoulders were a lot stronger because they were pulling things like that, that was around 4000 BC. So the area is a little foggy. They have a few different theories, but what I found really interesting was that they genetically tested the bones and the oldest horses that they could find, basically, in that area, and they found that there are over 125 genes related to domestication. And if they're correlated, this means that typically horses with these traits develop certain characteristics. So for example, muscle development in horses is a gene related to domestication because depending on what the person wanted the horse for, whether they wanted a plow horse, they would want a bigger horse. Whether they would want a transport horse, maybe a little bit smaller. And of course, if they were for warfare, then they would want a lighter, stronger horse that could move faster. They also have genes for things like balance. So this not only means the left side and right side are muscularly balanced, but the horse's agility and ability to move on uneven surfaces. And for example, ones that lived in the mountains had genes that were different from horses that lived on plains, which I found really interesting. But also things like cognitive function. So for example, horses that had to complete certain tasks, they would notice that their genes were different than wild horses. And there are a lot of different bits of evidence, pun not intended. They found change in the skeleton and the teeth. So working horses typically had stronger backs, and of course, the chariot-pulled horses, they would have usually injury around the area that the chariot was attached and change in their dental and jaw structure because of the bit. The second category of evidence was geographic distribution. So again, this is horse remains showing up in areas where there were known to not be wild horses. And usually the wild horses were in the plains. There's still a few groups of wild horses, usually in Alberta, for example, in Canada, but they are trapping them and selling some of them for the auction house or to the slaughterhouse, which breaks my heart. On archaeological sites, they found the remains of horses with humans. So, for example, in a town, if they dug them up, they would find that the bones are buried, for example, behind the farmhouse that used to be there, or in the vicinity of humans, basically. But a lot of historical researchers decided that, or argue, I guess, that domestication saved horses because in the wild, a lot of them are getting wiped out. And in the Western Hemisphere, a lot of them were wiped out during the last glacial period. And because we had humans had taken horses and started domesticating them, the wild ones were mostly wiped out. But because we had domesticated them, we saved the species from going extinct, which is fantastic. Not much I can say for humans right now, endangering a lot of species, but that is what I have for horses, which I find really interesting because now I don't see a lot of leisure horses, most of them not working so much in the fields anymore because we have machines for that, but sporting horses, breeding horses, they're not, of course, they're not wild horses. They don't have that freedom and they don't have to learn how to feed themselves and all that kind of stuff anymore. But for them, domestication, for most of them, is a happy life unless they're forced to work and perform at a level that they're not capable of or that pushes them too hard. But otherwise, most of them seem okay. I don't think I've seen, there was a case fairly recently that a farm nearby where I am right now abused a bunch of horses and starved some of them and buried them on the property. And for a while they got away with it, but people, I think somebody lost a baby horse, and somebody drove by and reported that the baby and the mother were starving, and this was in the winter, and started taking them food, and eventually reported them to the SPCA, and now they're being charged because I think it was about 13 horses buried on the property that the SPCA found. So they are being charged with neglect, and they are not allowed to own animals for, I believe, 3 years, something like that. I think the punishment should be higher than that for sure. There are some changes going on right now. If you didn't see the post I did a little while ago about the survey about what you think the law should be in Ontario for animal protection and things like that. So if you haven't seen it, I believe the data is closed now, but do keep an eye out for news about that because it should hopefully protect more animals. But again, there may be a staffing thing where the provincial area takes over more or less of the responsibility. But we will see what happens. I hope you have a fabulous rest of your week. About my workshop really quick, it's already half full. So if you haven't signed up and you're thinking about signing up, I highly suggest you join because the next one won't be until probably February or March, to weather depending. But it's already half full. I'm really, really excited, and I hope that somebody I know joins the class, but it'll be fun either way. So I look forward to meeting some of you, and I will see you next week.